Okay, this is the first video showing you about how to use the game engine number 7. I'm assuming you've copied from the student shared area the engine template, this file. Okay, and folder all the folder. Right, so what we're going to do to start with, we're going to load it up. So we're going to go into that folder, and there should be template solution file. It's got the little 10 in the Visual Studio icon. Just double click that to load it up, and that will load it up. Visual Studio tends to remember your settings if you stay on the same computer. It should normally remember this stuff. So it might turn up blank once it's first loaded. As long as it says ready in this bottom left hand corner, you should be alright. Now, to see the files that are part of this template, we need to open Solution Explorer. Now, there are a number of icons up towards this top right, okay, and that's where you'll find Solution Explorer. It's that one there. Okay, so if we just click that, it'll open a window with two main parts: the code section, which contains all the program files, and the content section, which has got where your audio and your graphics and your video and things like that go. Okay, and you can see there are a few things. You can close and open these up. There are a couple of things in there that I've just put part in this template, just naff little sound effects and a texture that you'll see later on. Okay, if we want to just run this to make sure it's working, we can do two steps. F6, so press F6. What that does is build it, and it should say build started. If it works, it'll say build succeeded. If it hasn't worked, you'll get an error list. Okay, so once we know that it's succeeded, we can press F5 to run the system. Okay, and it'll jig about for a minute, and then it'll run. It's chugging. It is loading, and there we go. And that's what the template does. It doesn't do much. It makes purple background, it displays the version of the engine that's running, and it shows you a little graphic. Okay, you can press escape to quit that, and then we'll have a look at the code breakdown of this. Okay, so in Solution Explorer you've got your files. So when we want to open a program, we just double click it. So let's start with game 1. Double click that. This is the start point really for the game. It contains lots of things that are to do with the engine. Okay, and these are all defined. I've put some comments in there so you can see what they are if you actually care. And then not really much you have to change in here, apart from this bit to do with the file manager and this bit to do with the resolution. Okay, so the file manager bit currently says test me. That's the name of the folder where all your saves are going to be. So you'll want to replace test me with a suitable name of your choice. So that might be the name of your game, name of your system. The other thing you'll want to change, the screen size, is basically setting the resolution. So I've got my resolution set to 800 wide, 600 high, like standard rectangle. Okay, so you might want to change it. Don't make it too big, because you'll just kill the graphics cards. We haven't got the most amazing graphics cards on earth. Okay, so that's the startup code. If we scroll down here, you'll see various bits, and don't change any of these things, they're all set for you. You'll get to this bit, load content. Now this doesn't do much other than run this subroutine called start preloader. Now we're going to need to make changes to that, and it's not really obvious where that is defined, but if we right click on that, there's an option called go to definition, so we can select that, and that will load that subroutine. And you can see up at the top where the tabs are. Game 1 was where we were. It's now opened startup for us automatically and taken us to the start preloader subroutine. Now this only does a couple of things. It does this first, changes the game state to preloader. Now game state is how you organise your logic and your key detection so that you only check for the certain logic that would happen in a particular state, or the particular keys in a particular state. Okay, and we'll come back and you'll see more of that. So after it's said to the game, right, you're in preloading state, it then changes the background colour to black, and then it asks the loading system, which works in the background, to load a texture and 2 sound effects, and then it tells it to start, and that is the end of the code. Okay, we're now getting the engine to do something in the background. So what happens next? Well, there is a file over here in the Solution Explorer called General Logic. Okay, now this, if we scroll down here, there is a subroutine called Game Loop. This one. This is all the code that happens. Okay, this is the little bit of code that produces the text that said what version of the engine was running. That was in the top left hand corner. It then runs this subroutine called check input. So if we right click on that and say go to definition, we can see what that one does. Doesn't do much. Okay, so the first part just says if they press F1, go into full screen mode. You got to be careful with that, because when you're working on your program, when you're in full screen mode and something crashes, it can really mess the graphics card up. Alright, so that's like when you're a long way down the road and you want to see what it looks like full screen, mess about with that, but I've put it in there. And then the other bit is this, switch game state. So this allows us to split up our input checking depending on what state we're in, and there's only one state picked up here, and that's for the title screen. So when you pressed escape, it was looking here, it said, oh, we're in title mode, and we'll see that code in a second. So we'll check for the escape key being pressed, and if it is, we'll run this subroutine. Now this subroutine is just below, doesn't do much other than exit the whole game. Eventually you'll have code in here, don't type this, you'll have code in here to like save files and settings and high scores and things like that. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to General Logic. So after we've done the input checks, we've got this. This is our test for our other logic that we want to happen. So we've got the game state switch again. Okay, now it's got there preloader this time. Look, if we're in preloading, run this subroutine, preload logic. There isn't anything else. There's an empty one set up in title, but there's no code there. So let's have a look at what preload logic does. So we're going to right click on it and say go to definition, and we get to it. It's got an if, a decision. So it's saying, is loading complete? So we've asked the background loader to load our graphics and our audio, and we're just sitting there waiting until it's done that, doing nothing. So we're effectively doing nothing. So we get a blank screen while we're waiting for everything to get loaded up, because you can't start putting sprites on screen if your graphics haven't loaded yet. So it's important that you do it this way. But as soon as that happens, what we do, we copy our graphic. We don't have to copy audio, that's handled for us, but we copy our graphic into one of our own textures. Okay, and then we tell the engine, right, okay, we're ready to set things up. Okay, so we say run setup tasks. So we go to the definition for that to see what that does. So this is after all the graphics have loaded. Change the game state to make sure that we don't keep doing the preload stuff. We've finished with that now. So we've got state setting up. And then we've got these two subroutines, create tile maps, create menus. You'll see how to create these in the later video, but if we just right click on one of these, so create tile maps, say go to definition, you'll see it's just an empty subroutine. There's nothing in there. Okay, so it's waiting for us to put some code in. If we want to go back now to the setup code. Let's do control minus, and that will take us back to the previous line of code we want. Okay, if you didn't follow that, just click on startup. Okay, or scroll back up, because it's all in that same file. Look, While your programs are small, it's quite easy to scroll up and down, but you'll notice that you'll use more and more of these little tools. Okay, so we set up the tile maps and the menus, and we do that here at the start because they take a little bit of a while to create, and we just want to create them once, and then we can use them throughout our system. Okay, we then tell the engine to change state to start title, so let's go to that. Go to definition of start title, and this is the bit that creates that really basic boring title screen for us. So we set the state to title. We then run this routine, clear all assets, and what that does is remove any sprites, music, sounds, menus, any timers, tile maps, gets rid of all of them so we can start afresh. Okay, because you don't want sprites from the last game state flying around. So if you were playing your game and you went back to your title screen but you had like your background still scrolling and things, it looks stupid. So we get rid of them all. The next line just checks the colour, and we change it to purple. Then we just set the size of the world. If you're doing a single screen game, you should only need to set the size to the size of the screen. Okay? If you're doing something that's going to scroll, you're going to need to make your world bigger, but you'll get onto that when you see that. We turn the mouse off on this line because you don't normally want the mouse on when you've got your mouse over your game. And then we run this subroutine, which creates a little sprite for us. Okay, which is just below. You can just see it here. Sprites range from very basic to ridiculously complicated, depending on what you want to do with them. We just wanted to display a graphic on screen. It's as simple as this. These two lines will always be the same. This creates a sprite and tells the engine to start doing things for us, like show the sprite, position the sprite, all that sort of stuff. The next line, this one, just defines where the graphic is. It's quite simple. It comes from that texture we loaded, okay, which was this sample texture, which we stored there in tx sample, and on that texture we have this bit of graphic that we want. Okay, now these numbers are the x position at 55, y position 22, width 402, height 38. So where I've got this like blue rectangle highlighted now, the 55 would be the left hand edge of it here, the 22 would be the top edge, 402 would be the width of that rectangle, and 38 would be the height. Okay, and we have to define that. That's how we define graphics for our sprites. And then these three lines just position the sprite. The alignment, we're saying treat the X and Y positions as the top middle of the sprite, and it just makes it easier to position things nicely. You can mess about with the alignments. Okay, right, so let's just run it again and just see that running. So I just clicked that little green thing there, that's like pressing F5, same thing. And eventually load up, and there it is running. So it was black to start with while it was loading the graphics. Then it goes purple when we're in the tile screen. Okay, end of video.